Mahe and I, peace, favor, nothing missing, nothing broken, nothing absent from your lives that are needed. This is a very special edition of No Apologies interview with me, Raven. I have a guest with me that I have been following for 23 years, you all. And this gentleman, you may have to just reel yourselves back and listen to this a couple of times because his information is fast and furious. His mind is very acute, and the data that he contains in his memory will blow you away. I have Bart Sibrel with me. Bart, thank you for joining me tonight.
Oh, no problem, Raven. How are you?
I am doing fantastic, and I hope you are doing well, folks. If you do not know who I'm talking about, you will find a infamous or very famous interview that he's done with Joe Rogan recently, and I found it just to be refreshing. Um, if you do not know, we're going to go back in history just a little bit, and then we want to catch up with what he's getting ready to do now or just released. Bart, can you explain to people your original, I'm sorry, conspiracy theory? You know how this works. That came out in 2001 that just blew my mind.
Well, I've been a filmmaker most of my life,
Hmm.
and my most famous or infamous film is called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. It's on the homepage. You can watch it for free at Sibrel.com. That's S as in Sam, I, B as in boy, REL, Sibrel.com, which is my last name. And you will see a film that was financed by a millionaire who builds rockets for NASA, who knows that the moon missions were fake, and he thought that was inappropriate. And his patriotic contribution was to finance a film to expose it. So I grew up believing that the moon missions are real, like everybody else, and maybe even more so, having a literal shrine to them in my bedroom from every home that I moved to every couple of years because my father was in the Air Force. And I was
Hmm.
just 4 years old to sleep in bed at the time. But a few weeks later, my father got a VIP package of color prints from Apollo 11. And they were my cherished present that I all put up side by side in a big block on my bedroom wall. And so I saw these pictures from the age of 4 to 14 at least once a day and probably more. So I saw them 10,000 times
Uh
over
huh.
10 years and assumed that they were on the moon and thought it was glorious. And then when I was 14, I saw a TV program with a gentleman who worked for NASA as a contractor editing high clearance memos. He had second highest security clearance to von Braun, and he
Hmm.
edited a memo, von Braun's native language not being English, where he warned the Pentagon that the likelihood of going to the moon on the first attempt with 1960s technology was only a 1 in 10,000 chance, and that they bluffed, like having crap in poker. They pretended to go to not only get the Soviets to think they had equal or greater rocket technology, at least at the time, and also to, I guess, pacify Americans who were protesting against the Vietnam War. And so I'm an open minded 14-year-old. When I first heard that, I'm thinking, oh, I never thought about that. So I went back and looked at the pictures on my wall, and sure enough, it seemed like there was a line left to right horizontally in a lot of the pictures where the real soil ended and what was kind of more out of focus backdrop began. That in the original pictures was actually a different color than the original. The original pictures had the soil kind of caramel brown. They
Uh
since
huh.
color that to match the bluish gray background so you can't tell the foreground from the fake background. In any case, that kind of planted a seed. I've always been interested in acting and playwriting, and by the age of 24, that turned into becoming a filmmaker and having a video
Mm.
production company where I produced music videos and TV commercials and things like that. And of course, a filmmaker's job is to make fake scenes look real. And I eventually could tell not only that the pictures that they claimed were taken with sunlight were not taken with sunlight, they in fact were taken with electrical light because I own the same lights in my production studio. So
Yes.
I can tell you what kind of light they used. In fact, if you go to Sibrel.com, there's a 3 minute video on the homepage where I showcase a picture in sunlight. And you can just have two friends go outside on a cloudless day to their front yard or parking lot at work, or look at two trees, two telephone poles in a cloudless day. You'll see that their shadows will always run parallel. The sun's about 1 million times bigger than the Earth, 93 million miles away. So it's going to cast shadows in the same direction over an entire continent or moon. And then we show a picture taken from the alleged last mission to the moon, where objects that are 5 feet apart have their shadows intersecting at 90 degrees. You can
Yes.
prove the sad fact that they really did fake the moon landing in one picture of shadows intersecting at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart, which is impossible in sunlight and can only happen in electrical light, which means they're on Earth, which means they didn't go to the moon. You can prove it with one picture. The problem is, Raven, that people have this emotional attachment to it.
Hmm.
Pride. And unlike whoever killed JFK, regardless, he's still dead. It's just a matter of changing who did it and why. Same with 9/11. It's a tragedy. 3,000 people are dead. You can change who did it and why. Everyone's still dead. This is
Hmm.
different. This is a positive lie. And I come along trying to take away candy and give people a plate of manure, and they are defending the candy, which is a lie. You have sincere people defending the candy. I even talked to a college professor teaching aerospace at a major university in America who said that if an Apollo astronaut said on national TV that the moon missions were falsified, that he would still think he walked on the moon anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
it has become a god to people. And how dare you say the moon landings are fake? And some people who, in every other venue, are anti corruption or anti deep state, whatever you want to call it, still
Yes.
defend the moon landings. It's like, I know America has gotten bad, but at least we went to the moon. So the first proof that we didn't go to the moon are shadows intersecting at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart. Go to a courtroom. You could prove it in a court of law. Take the jury outside. Shadows are parallel. Trees, telephone poles, two people. Go inside, turn off the lights, bring an electrical light or two. They intersect at 90 degrees. You just proved that the moon missions were taken with electrical light, not sunlight, which means they're inside a television studio, which means they faked them. That's it. That's all the proof you need. That legally proves it, right? Then, if you need
Right.
more proof, watch a funny thing happened on the way to the moon where we uncovered footage of them faking being halfway to the moon right in front of your eyes with a 1 foot model of the Earth dated 2 days into the flight with the third track of the CIA telling them to fake a 4 second radio delay from Earth orbit to make it pretend like they're on their way to the moon further away. That's proof.
Well,
And then
now,
we have, go
Bart,
ahead, I'm sorry.
I need to ask. Now, how did you get the audio that was uncut? That is a question that people have asked many times, and I've asked it myself.
Well, I was producing the film under the theory it might be true that they faked it. I
Hmm.
didn't. I assumed they did go, but when I started analyzing it, there were more and more suspicions the more I looked into it.
Hmm.
So I told NASA at the time I'm doing an anniversary commemoration, or basically doing a documentary about the moon
Hmm.
landings, which is true. It is a documentary about the moon landings. It's just one that intends to show the sad fact that they really did fake it. I'm not
Hmm.
about to tell NASA, hey, I think we didn't go to the moon. Please send me proof. So
Yes.
I say I'm thorough. I want every picture, every video, and every film reel from the first mission. What I
Hmm.
figured, Raven, is if they faked it, they're more likely to have made a mistake the first time they faked it because they never faked it before.
Absolutely.
And Bill Casey, the guy who read the memo from von Braun that they could not go to the moon with 60s technology, thinks a whistleblower sent it to me. But in any case, most of the footage is the same footage over and over again. They sent me 15, 20 reels, and it's like the same 10 minutes edited over and over again. And then of an astronaut actually standing on the surface of the moon, a still picture, there's only like 20 pictures. 20 pictures. I mean, people do 20 pictures in front of the Eiffel Tower. You know what I
Yes.
mean? They're going to the moon for the first time. There's only 20 pictures of an astronaut on the surface and zero of Neil Armstrong. Can you imagine that? I went to the
Wow.
archives. You have to walk into a vault And there, I like, show me a picture of Neil Armstrong standing on the surface of the moon. There is not one. There's no still photograph because he didn't want his picture taken. So in any case, I got this reel of footage. I pop it in. It says at the beginning of it, "Don't show to the public," and it's a
Oh,
special effect reel. It has a slate on it that says "test." Well, test
ah,
means special effect. And the thing is dated by a computer timestamp 2 days into the flight. So they're supposed to be halfway to the moon. They're claiming on the segments that they wanted to show to the public that here we are halfway to the moon. So if you imagine a mostly black TV screen with a little blue ball in it, they allegedly have the lens at the window's glass to shoot the far Earth far away. The
mm-hmm,
lights come up and you see it's a 1 foot model of the Earth that they have contrived from the spacecraft. It's very ingenious. Had I only seen the few seconds they showed to the public of the best of the footage, I doubt if I would have figured it out. But we have the
uh-huh.
hour of them faking the shot. The lights come up and you see it's a 1 foot model of the Earth that they're pretending is floating in space. You can see that for free in the film A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon on the homepage of Sibrel.com. And then at the beginning of this footage, we hear NASA say, "Hey, the TV picture looks great." And then there's 4 seconds of dead air. And then we hear talk. And then Neil Armstrong starts speaking. So, when you talk through walkie talkies, it has kind of that, I don't know, radio type of sound. That's the
Uh-huh.
sound of NASA. That's the sound of the astronauts. But whoever's saying talk, it's crystal clear wherever the tape is being recorded. And so the problem is if he answered NASA right away, it would give away the fact that he's really only in Earth orbit a couple of 100 miles above the Earth. So it would go like, "How are you? I'm fine. How does the TV picture look? Great. Hey, it looks pretty good to me. Okay, thank you." See, that's too fast. They're supposed to be halfway to the moon, so they estimated 2 seconds out and 2 seconds back. They actually underestimated it dramatically because that's how long
Yes.
it takes to talk from Atlanta to Baghdad, if in fact they are in Baghdad. In any case, so we hear this somebody prompting Neil Armstrong not to speak until 4 seconds have been counted off to give the fake impression that he's further away from the Earth. We have that on the tape too.
Yes.
So when I saw that, I'm like, oh my gosh, they really did fake the moon landing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how sad is that? So we have shadows intersecting at 90 degrees, which proves it in a court of law. We have this tape we uncovered of them faking being halfway to the moon right in front of your eyes with the third track of audio of the CIA telling them to fake a 4 second radio delay. I showed that to an NBC News director. He practically fainted and exclaimed, "This absolutely proves they didn't go to the moon. They never left Earth orbit." And I said, "What are we going to do?" He refused to broadcast it for fear it would cause a civil war against the federal
Wow.
government. 10 years later, another news director at NBC sees it. They're going to break the story nationwide. They fly me to the Waldorf Astoria in New York, put me up, pay thousands of dollars for the exclusive license of this footage I uncovered, record my interview, have it scheduled. They get a call from the federal government threatening them, and they back down and don't broadcast it.
Wow.
And this is the thing, whoever killed JFK, he's still dead, and whoever did 9/11, they're still dead. This is different. This is a positive lie. I really believe, Raven, this is the linchpin or the finger out of the dike. If the truth comes out about this, it will enrage the public to where there might be some form of anarchy that might follow without, I mean, do we really, no offense, need the federal government? I mean, if right now, let's just say all the federal government ran on one electrical plug and somebody tripped over the cord right now, did anything change for you? Nothing. The same thing's over here.
No.
I don't think there's any different, except I'd have a third more money in my bank account every year. And maybe they wouldn't fake moon landings and kill people to cover it up. So
Yeah.
maybe we should have the independent states of America. And, when the federal government is violating their Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, which says when any nation becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. I did interviews with people that I did not put in the film at the request of the people involved until after they died, which is in my book at
Mm-hmm.
Sibrel.com. It came out. I read it myself in audio or Kindle or print, including my interview of the widow of the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon, who wouldn't cooperate with the fraud, who his widow told me that he was murdered by the CIA. Okay, so not only are they taking a third of our money and faking moon landings, they're also using that money to pay the salaries of CIA agents who are killing our neighbors for exposing their crimes. What were
Exactly.
the three things? Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. When anyone becomes destructive of these things, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish such a government. Life. They're murdering their own people, right?
Well, now,
And it's
Bart,
not the first time.
you said that this new book that you have written, and I want people to get the title. Folks, I have not read it, so I'm in this a little bit blind at this point.
Well, the book is called Moon Man, the true
Mm-hmm.
story of the filmmaker on the CIA hit list. And basically, when I found that footage, which is showcased and a funny thing happened on the way to the moon, I had major problems because I had proof in my house that they faked the moon landing and I freaked
Yes.
out. And then moments later, when I warned Bill Casey, my number one source, that I had this footage, the phone call was interrupted with this screech like, ee! And I
Wow.
could just barely hear him, and we couldn't communicate with one another. And then I go to church. I'm trying to get advice from the elders. What do I do? I have this tape of them faking being halfway to the moon. They said, drive like a bat out of hell to CNN. You've bitten off more than you can chew. So I'm literally in the
Mm.
back alley trying to get the tape in the back door of CNN when I'm surrounded by government agents who
Mm-hmm.
literally drugged me with true serum and asked me all sorts of questions that I was so drugged I only remember the first one or two questions. So all that's in the book that I never talked about publicly, as well as the interview with the widow of the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon, who the CIA killed in her own words because he wouldn't cooperate with the fraud.
Mm-hmm.
So that's in the book. And then part of my follow up film, Astronauts Gone Wild, I basically tracked down some Apollo astronauts and showed them this footage I uncovered. And in one instance, Edgar Mitchell in his house, I think was in Florida or Texas, I don't remember. And he got outraged, literally assaults me on camera.
Mm-hmm.
And in the commotion, we accidentally leave a high quality wireless microphone on him. And in the commotion, my camera operator forgets to hit stop record. So while the camera is in the back seat of the rental car, we're recording the private conversations of the Apollo astronaut and his son in their house with the door closed. And they're
Wow.
talking about calling the CIA to have me killed, word for word. And so I'm like, oh, if they really went to the moon, and I'm some silly person who thinks it was done in a TV studio, why
Mm-hmm.
would this care? So the first proof is shadows intersecting at 90 degrees, impossible to happen in sunlight, which means electrical light, which means they didn't go. We have them faking being halfway to the moon with a 1 foot model that two NBC news directors agreed proved they never left Earth orbit. Then we have the logic. Today, with 5 decades better rockets and computers, the farthest
Mm-hmm.
that NASA can send an astronaut into space is only 1,000th the distance to the moon. So what they're really saying is, back when all of NASA had 1 millionth the computing power of a single cell phone, they sent
Mm-hmm.
astronauts on the first attempt ahead of schedule with 1960s technology 1,000 times farther into space than they can do today with 5 decades better technology.
Well,
So
now
for the
I'm
first time in recorded history, they had better technology in the past than they do today, which is impossible. Never happened.
exactly. Well, and we've had the interviews with different NASA people, the one that they won't let talk anymore, who said, well, we had the technology, but we lost it all.
Well, no, they destroyed it intentionally, is what he says.
Well, yeah. Well, and
Which is an
I,
indirect, yeah.
Well, and the other thing I find fascinating is all the data reels from all the logistics vanished as well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they're for some reason they spent an equivalent of $250 billion is the latest
Yes.
estimate in dollars. And when they were done, they intentionally, out of their own mouth, said they destroyed the hardware, the schematics, the diagrams, the original rocket telemetry as to where the rocket was, and the original videotapes. They
Yes.
intentionally destroyed all of that. Now, if they really went, that's the last thing you would do. But if you perpetrated a fraud, that's exactly what you would do. So you see, that actually proves the fraud. Because if there was ever a technology you might consider destroying, would be the atomic bomb after World War II. But just 10 years
Yes.
later, atomic bombs were 1,000 times more explosive. So if they could go
Hmm.
to the moon with 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone, we would have been on Mars 10 years later. We'd be in another solar system by now, and there'd be bases, hotels all over the moon, right?
Oh yeah. Oh
You
yeah.
can't you can't have greater technology in the past. I mean, think about the breakthroughs like the light bulb. Imagine they had a light bulb back, in the time of Edison, but no one can make a light bulb today. No, that doesn't make sense, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Well, now
No,
I get.
light bulbs are so much more efficient and powerful and last longer. Or they broke the sound barrier, in the 50s. Well, no one can do it since. No, now they can go much faster than the sound barrier. And so for some reason, they can go to the moon in the past, but they can't go today. That's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon when it should be so much easier. Elon Musk just said out of his own mouth to go to the moon is going to take 8 fuel trips. Otherwise, we won't
Mm.
have enough to land on the moon and come back up. And how did they do that the first time in one rocket? You see? And so it's coming out that they didn't go. The
Oh
only
yeah.
obstacle is people's pride. Pride is simply the unwillingness to admit that I'm wrong. You see
Now.
that? It's
Oh yeah.
humility, it's the willingness. It's good to be wrong. Number one, not walking around in error anymore, right? And then number
Yeah.
two, I'm learning something new. It's amazing. And then it's just so pride. They waved their flags and they did all this. Well, and then people say, the number one defense of it is they wouldn't lie about something so important.
Oh, that's yeah.
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 So here's the thing. Robert Kennedy Jr., who has more access to the JFK files than Oliver Stone does, says his research indicates that the CIA killed his uncle, President Kennedy. So I take
Yes.
his expert opinion as the truth. Then you have Robert McNamara, defense secretary during the Vietnam War, which 90% of Americans were against, just like 90% of Americans were against entering World War II prior to Pearl Harbor.
Hmm.
And then he and the CIA got together by his own admission and contrived a false attack of a Vietnam ship against an American ship, and they said afterwards it never happened. They
Yep.
passed a law in Congress to start the war based on something that never happened.
Yeah. Gulf of
And
Tonkin, y'all.
that killed 58,220 Americans. So if they're willing to
Hmm.
throw away the lives of 58,220 of their own soldiers, if they're willing to kill their own duly elected president, I don't think they have a problem faking a video image, do you?
No, or eliminating a few astronauts that might open their mouths. We know this. So I got a few other questions that I wanted to throw out at you, and I know you've been asked these before, but I think people will find your answers fascinating. The first one, the connection between Von Braun and Disney.
Well, he did some films in the 50s, and my book is interactive. If you go to Sibrel.com, there's a button up there called Moon Man Video Links. And the book has 17 links. I write a chapter. I say go to link one, write another chapter, go to link two. Some chapters may have 2 or 3 links in there. One of
Hmm.
them, I think it's a supplemental link, is Von Braun says you have to build a space station first to go to the moon, ferry up fuel, which is exactly what Elon Musk says.
Hmm.
And then he talks about the radiation belt and things that prevent you from going to the moon. He had those films were produced by Disney. And of course, Disney was involved in propaganda films with the government during World War II. And
Yes.
there's nothing in and of itself wrong with propaganda for a just cause. For example, let's say, I'm not saying it was, but in this example, let's say World War II was a just cause and they need people to volunteer or they need people to buy U.S. bonds to help pay for winning the war. And you create a
Mm-hmm.
film to encourage that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If it's wartime and you're about to invade in Normandy, and you want to make sure the Germans don't pay attention to that area, and you create a fake film of them potentially invading at another location to save millions of lives, I don't think there's a problem with that. This is different. Um, when President Clinton was asked, after he finally admitted, after 20 times of denial, that he had an affair in the Oval Office, when he finally admitted it, they asked him, well, why? Why did you do it? And he said, because I could. Because
Mm-hmm.
I could get away with it. That's why they faked the moon landing, because they could get away with it. That's arrogant leaders. And then they're murdering Apollo astronauts who won't cooperate to cover it up. They're murdering, lying, embezzling people.
Mm-hmm.
And they're at large. They're at large. Do you understand that, Raven? It's
Oh
like
yeah.
saying, well, our county has one child go missing every month for the last 50 years. It's just one of those things. No, I don't
Yeah.
think so. I think you better
Yeah.
do something about it. And these people are killing Kennedy, doing the Gulf of Tonkin, starting wars without cause, faking moon landings, and who knows what else they're doing. They're murdering their own people, lying to their own people, and they're only getting better and more arrogant at doing it. And the moon landing fraud is the one thing that, if exposed, would bring them down. Two NBC News directors said so. I didn't agree
Mm-hmm.
with them at the time. I thought you're overreacting. But I got this feedback in the book that if the truth came out, people will never trust the federal government ever again. And that's why there's so many films defending the moon landing fraud. You type in moon landing fraud, you don't get anything about the fraud. You get 1,001 videos about how anyone who thinks they falsified it is crazy. Let us reassure you that the moon landings are real. Now, if I went
Yes.
around even saying that Mickey Mouse was the first president, not George Washington, do you think there'd be 1,000 films on YouTube reassuring people that Mickey Mouse wasn't the first president? No, the reason why they have to defend it is because it's made out of straw, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see?
Oh yeah, I agree. Now I remember Von Braun. Folks, I'm giving away my age. I remember a couple of Von Braun videos where he described the need for a rocket the size of the Empire State Building to even attempt it in one go. And a lot of people have forgotten this. And then the space station with fuel already on hand. Can you even? I can't. Can you even rationalize why people still are believing these stories?
Well, because of pride and emotions. People
Hmm.
think science is quote science. It's not. Science is propaganda. Science is commercialism. Science is emotion. If there's a guy teaching aerospace in a major university, a professor of aerospace, who said out of his own mouth, if he saw Neil Armstrong confess on national TV that the moon missions were fake, that he'd still think he walked on the moon anyway, something's wrong with people's mind and emotions. This is a quote scientist saying that if he was probably 10 years old at the time, that
Hmm.
he knows 10-year-old watching it on his living room TV
Hmm.
more than the man who was there. That's how his arrogance, his pride, and him making an idol out of technology, an idol out of academia. You see, I was
Yes.
hired by some, I guess, what do you call it, fraternity group of the University of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to show my film and to lecture for it. I had a
Hmm.
contract that they were going to pay my airfare and give me $2,000 for 1 hour, 2 hours technically,
Nice.
one to speak and one to show the film. The university forbid it. They forbid open-minded debate about what truth is in a university. Universal thinking, universal thought,
Hmm.
the same for everybody. The problem is these intelligent people only have a very narrow, string wide, narrow knowledge of one technical thing that they can do well. They can fix
Yes.
an air conditioner, but nothing else. They can build landing gear of a 747, but nothing else. They can, make an atom split, but nothing else. They have no wisdom of the corruption that's going on in the world and no open mindedness. They have become arrogant in thinking that because they have a diploma or doctorate, it means they know everything. I just recently started, thinking about natural health as opposed to medicine, right?
Yes.
Pharmaceuticals. So I asked my doctor, when I'm starting to look into this, what do you know about natural medicine? They looked at me like I asked them if they spoke Martian. And then they said the following, virtually word for word. All I know is what I was taught in university, which is to prescribe this pill for this illness.
Yes. Yes. When
That's that's what they said out of their own mouth.
now I tend to ask questions that are a little bit different because I know your background. What do you think about the space program as a primer for the technocracy that we're seeing today?
Well, I don't know. It seems to me it's a front. It's a financial front. It's a military front, and it's a psychological front.
Hmm.
Uh, I used to drive past this place in Nashville, Tennessee called Columbo's Hot Chicken. And I was a fan of the TV show Columbo, and I drove past it for years saying, one day I'm going to go there, one day I'm going to go there. Apparently, the thing was open 24 hours. And so one night or morning, for whatever reason, I was up at like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. I said, I'm going to go to Columbo's. So I drive down there, a tiny place. I had like four tables. And this was like, 30, 40 years ago. One piece
Hmm.
of chicken was $5, and it was on a top of a piece of untoasted white bread with a pickle on, sliced pickle on top, and a toothpick going through the pickle into the chicken. That was it. And there was a lady there sitting behind a 20-line telephone, taking call after call after call at like 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, oh, okay. I see what's going on here. This is a front. And apparently it was the style of the time.
Yeah.
Hot chicken places were known for running numbers and football bets and whatever.
Oh yeah.
And so it was a front. And the CIA does that all the time. They pretend to be a dry cleaner or a dentist or whatever to infiltrate whoever they want to infiltrate. And so apparently, these government agencies are fronts as well. I did an interview recently in Austin, both with InfoWars, Joe Rogan, and Mike Adams of Natural News.
Yes.
And he pointed out that the administrator of NASA said about 3 weeks ago that the far side of the moon is always dark. It's always in the shadow. I don't think so. From what I remember from eighth grade science, is it's just like the front side, even though the same side faces the Earth all the time. It has a 14-day day and a 14-day night that
Yes.
constantly goes around the moon, hence full moon. And then, of course, during an eclipse, there would be, all sun on the other side too. So this is the administrator of NASA not knowing, and I think their number one objective is going to the moon, right? So the administrator over, quote, returning to the moon doesn't know that the far side of the moon has night and day changing just like the side facing us. He doesn't know
Yes.
that. And so why is he there? Who is he? He's a token. He's a front.
Hmm.
The administrator's a front. They want Boy Scouts who believe that the moon missions are real as their spokesperson because people can detect a liar. I dare them to put up Charles Duke or a surviving astronaut to face me because I'm not accusing Boy Scouts who naively believe that the moon landings are real when they're fake because it's the glory of science or America. I'm
Uh-huh.
accusing the astronauts and the government and the NASA administrator of faking the moon landing. Put one of them up, and I bet they won't do it in a million years because they can't find somebody who can lie that convincingly.
Yes.
And the fact is, our government is super corrupt. You have people who run the FDA who used to be the president of pharmaceutical companies, and then you have people leaving the FDA and becoming the president of pharmaceutical companies. That
Yes.
should be illegal. Why is that legal? I have no idea. You
Well,
know,
now, I got to ask you, have you ever been to Cape Canaveral?
yes, I have more than
See,
once.
I've been there multiple times, and I always found it a fascinating place. But there was this weird artifice about it that I couldn't explain. Does that make sense?
Well, I didn't get that feeling exactly, but I probably should have if I were more spiritually awake at the time. But I remember going into my first pornography store and my first liquor store,
Uh
and both those places reeked of demons. You know what I mean? It just
huh.
something about it was off. If I were more spiritually awake, I'm sure I would have had more weirdness at NASA. But they polish it up. I was in the press corps at the time, and they
Hmm.
they have these elaborate luncheons, really good food for people in the press. You get these leather bound, portfolios, maps of the universe, and souvenirs, and they treat you like a king if you're in the press. And
Hmm.
I got to sit closer to a space shuttle launch than the president. And
Wow.
so that's how they treat the press, so that the press treats them well.
Hmm.
And so, but then when I started realizing the moon landings are fake and went back I had press credentials, and I was on the visitors list at NASA. Visitors list, press credentials, their badge that they gave me to go
Hmm.
in to some event where there were some Apollo astronauts there. And I asked one of them if he really walked on the moon or not, and they threw me out. You would have thought that
Yes.
was communist China or communist North Korea. That was the United States of America. The United States of America is forbidding debate in public universities if you are against their universal thinking, right?
Yes.
They
Now,
they forbid it. You see,
uh, yeah. Now, I want to emphasize something to folks. Now, how many astronauts have you met?
at least 8 of them.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, 8 or 10. Um, well, what did you think about the flaps that Neil Armstrong had there towards the end of his life, where he, especially with that little girl, where he said, "Well, if we had gone, but we didn't go." Did you catch that?
Yeah, that was recorded about 10 years ago, started
Yeah,
making the round about 2 years ago. This is Buzz Aldrin
Buzz
slipped
Aldrin. You're
up.
right. You're right.
He,
Buzz
he
Aldrin.
slipped up and said, "We didn't go." He said it word for word. We didn't go there. And it's important to know why we didn't go, right? Well,
Hmm.
not enough fuel, not enough radiation protection, so forth and so on. He tripped up. We do have, and a funny thing happened on the way to the moon on the homepage of Sibrel.com at the end of the
Hmm.
film. Neil Armstrong speaking on the 25th anniversary with tears in
Hmm.
his eyes, saying to high school students touring the White House, perhaps someday you'll be able to remove one of truth's protective layers.
Hmm.
And, I've met him. I've met Buzz Aldrin on a couple occasions, 3 occasions actually. And maybe I shouldn't have said that last one. Oh, well, too late. But in any case, uh, so they know that I know. They've made it clear to me that
Hmm.
they didn't go to the moon, and good luck proving it or trying to prove it.
Yes.
Uh, but what can you do? They know it's an uphill battle. They know even people who are critical of the federal government still believe we went to the moon, and they're
Yeah.
defended and are mad at me trying to wake them up before they walk over a cliff. They're mad at me. It is what it is. Pride comes before a fall. And it says that you can't see the truth if you're prideful.
Yes.
You
Well, now
know?
I have another question that you probably been asked, but I've never heard anybody ask you this, in an interview. What do you think about the poor three that blew up on the launch pad? Do you think that was part of the cover up as well?
Which one?
The three that were killed on the launch pad at Cape Canaveral.
Well, it didn't blow up. There weren't rockets being ignited. You're talking about the Apollo 1 fire?
Yeah.
Well, that's the ones who their widow and son told me they were murdered by the
Ah.
CIA.
See, folks, I
Betty,
told you I was blind to this. I was blind to the book, so bear with us.
yeah, basically, I interviewed the widow for 4 hours of the man who
Uh-huh.
was going to be the first man to walk on the moon, most beloved of all the astronauts, who ended up becoming a whistleblower at NASA, saying
Mm-hmm.
they were 10 years away from going to the moon, not one, and they wouldn't fix anything because they were going to fake it and hadn't told him yet. And he was complaining to a senator and congressman, and at one point held a press conference without permission where he took a bunch of
Uh,
reporters up at the top of the rocket and hung a lemon the size of a grapefruit. And a few days later, he's dead.
yes.
His widow told me that on January 26, 1967, he came home from work and said the following: "Son, for some strange reason, the CIA is all over the launch pad at NASA today inspecting the equipment. I've been
Mm.
here for many years, never seen the CIA here once. Why did they show up today?" The very
Yeah.
next day, he's dead from faulty equipment that the CIA inspected the previous day. That's his
Wow.
widow telling me that. It's not me
Wow.
saying it, it's his widow
Folks, don't
saying it.
forget Sibrel.com, folks. Sibrel.com. And I
So,
am so glad that he's had me on here with me.
so the book goes into this for the very first time. And
Nice.
so not only are they, faking moon landings, they're murdering Americans to cover it up. And these people are still at large. It still is the official policy of NASA, of the federal government, that the moon landings are real when they're not. The problem is, if the truth comes out, they're going to have to investigate the Apollo 1 fire immediately after. And
Absolutely.
they not only killed the crew, they killed at least four other Apollo astronauts who were in backup crews who wouldn't
Wow.
participate in the fraud, and they killed the leading investigator into the Apollo 1 fire, Ronald Barron. They killed him
Mm-hmm.
too. And
Yep.
first, he was fired as a whistleblower, and then when he spoke to Congress and made such a powerful testimony that they were not going to keep the moon schedule, he died before his second appearance before Congress. Now, in my
Yes.
little hometown, not exactly hometown, but Nashville, Tennessee, I was
Mm-hmm.
working at the NBC affiliate, and I remember covering a story once, Raven, where some girl, Vanderbilt student, was taking $20 out of the ATM and got shot in the heart for $20.
Mm-hmm.
And imagine when there's
Billions.
billions involved.
Yeah.
And this guy is potentially having a problem with that money flow, right? Imagine what they'll do,
Oh
right?
yeah. Now, two other things that I wanted to cover with you, because folks, we got an hour. So the first one I want to cover with you, and I know you've talked about this, but I think folks will find it fascinating. What about the Kubrick connection that people keep talking about?
Well, they did fake the moon landing. That's a fact, which means they had to have somebody in charge of the fake photography, which means they had a couple of choices. They could hire the general of the media department at the Pentagon and have great security, but amateur results. Or they could hire the best filmmaker on the planet, get the short term benefit of realistic pictures, and worry about him blabbing later, which had to be the choice they made. So Stanley Kubrick was filming in 1968 a film about going to the moon. What a
Yep.
coincidence.
Yep.
And he made a film a few years earlier where he was kind of poking fun at the military, but a lot of intelligent people in the military found that very amusing and technically extremely well made. And then a few years later, NASA gave him the most technologically advanced film lens, which could photograph under candlelight. And
Mm-hmm.
then in his last film, Eyes Wide Shut, he insisted contractually that it open up on the 30th anniversary of the launch to the moon. And then in the film The Shining, the little red rum boy has a hand knit sweater that says Apollo 11 on it.
Mm-hmm.
He's who I would have chosen. Now there's a video floating around the internet of an alleged Kubrick confessing. That's not true. That's a dramatic reenactment.
Yes.
And the fact that it is taken out of context is largely the filmmaker's fault for not making that clear. You know it's fake because they refer to me being punched by Buzz Aldrin, which happened in 2002, and Kubrick died in 1999. Nevertheless, maybe that is done to discredit the moon landing fraud. There are several clips out there that are fake clips of the faking, maybe so that they can be exposed, so that people won't realize it really has been faked. Who knows what these poker player CIA people are up to? The fact is, you can't have 1,000 times greater space traveling technology in 1969 with 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone than you can today with 5 decades better rockets and computers,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And so that's just the way that it is. And if people weren't so blinded by pride, they would see the truth for what it is.
Hmm.
And it's dangerous to have these people at large, just like it's dangerous to say, oh, well, one child disappears every month for the last 50 years. Oh, well, one of those things. No, that's dangerous. And what we
That's
have
very
here
dangerous.
is a government that killed their own president, that faked the beginning of a war that killed 58,220 of their own people, faked the moon landing that for some reason people defend, which is kind of sad. And these
Yes.
same people, their apprentices, their way of life, their style, that government, whatever you want to call it, is in place right now.
Hmm.
And so that's dangerous, don't you think?
I've been thinking that for about 30 years of my life, Bart. The other question that I have to ask, because people are going to want to hear your take on it, and I don't know if you've ever been asked this because I've listened to a lot of your interviews. What do you think about the sideline that has come up that the faked moon landings were to cover up for a secret space program that actually went?
No, that's not true. For example, we've had this little thing that went on for the last 3 years.
Hmm.
And the inventor of the technology that determines whether you're sick with that illness or not, he himself said, if
Oh,
you
Carrie?
use it, yeah, that's right. If you use it to detect that illness or not, you'll get a false positive 95% of the time. He's the
Yes.
inventor of it. So he died right before this
Yep.
little thing began of the same illness, kind of a CIA little
Yeah.
signature there.
Little heart attack.
And
Yeah.
he's not around to say the whole way to show people who are infected is completely flawed and does the opposite of the truth, right? And
Hmm.
then they're calling motorcycle decapitations dead from the illness on the death certificate. They're calling
Hmm.
people who were dying in hospice care of cancer dead from the illness. So if the illness is real, they wouldn't have to do that, would they? Now,
No.
about 1 out of 4 Americans now doubts the authenticity of the moon missions. Now, they constantly quote a survey from 25 years ago. Every time they do a national story about the moon landing fraud, they say only 10% doubt it. But that's
Yeah.
from 1999. If they did one today, they'd find out it's 25%. So we have 75% of Americans doubting the authenticity of Oswald killing Kennedy. We have
Hmm.
50% doubting that a pinhole airplane going in and out of a steel grid can cause its collapse. Just look at Oklahoma City bombing where half the building was blown away. Still stood,
Hmm.
didn't it? And now they have 25% believing the craziest of all things, which happens to be true, that they did fake the moon landing. So that means at least 1 out of 4 people follow alternative media, right?
Hmm.
Which means they have to have two lies, one for the general public, this illness came from an animal, and one
Hmm.
for alternative media. Okay, I'm gonna let you know a little secret here. It didn't come from an animal, it came from a lab. It's very serious. That's a
Hmm.
lie also. If it weren't a lie, they wouldn't have to fake the tests, fake the deaths, would they? There'd be
Yep.
plenty of proof that there was a real illness. So they had two lies. So intellectuals, UFO people, can tell clearly from the photographs of shadows intersecting that it was taken on Earth in electrical light. But they still want to believe in the League of Planets, just like the professor still wants to believe in the moon landing, even if an Apollo astronaut confessed.
Yeah.
And so they don't care why you believe that the illness is real as long as you do. If you want to believe it came from an animal or if you want to believe it came from a lab, whichever, as long as you believe it's real. The same about the moon landings. You want to believe Neil Armstrong did it. You want to believe secret crews having tea with aliens did it, as long as you believe we went. So that's a lie for intellectuals who can perceive that the moon landing photographs are fake, which they are, simply because they didn't go. Period.
Well, they always say the bigger the lie and the more it's repeated, the harder it is to undo.
Well, yeah, and Goebbels, Hitler's propaganda artist, said the bigger the
Uh-huh.
lie, the more people will believe it, and the less likely they will doubt it because they won't think someone would be so audacious as to tell a big lie.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, 129,500 people were involved in the making of the first atomic bomb during World War II. That's a lot of people, but
Yes.
only eight knew that they were making an atomic bomb. And just because you have hundreds of thousands of people, doing vendors and gloves and doors and boots for the rocket, doesn't mean they're
Mm-hmm.
let in on the secret. If that's the case, the CIA is a bunch of idiots. Hey, they tell the guy making the glove, hey, we're really not going to the moon, but you're not to tell anybody. Come on. The fact is, Eugene Krantz said that someone in the command center at a console cannot tell any difference whatsoever between a rehearsal flight and a real flight. It's just a bunch of numbers going by on a screen. So if they can't tell a difference, and there's no independent press coverage, it's not like World War II going on Earth everywhere, right? It's
Yeah.
it's out in outer space. Who knows where they are, except the United States government and three government employees sworn to secrecy, right? And no
Exactly.
independent press coverage. No live pictures during the landing. Only
Yeah.
pictures from only pictures from the federal government who killed their own president, who faked the beginning of the Vietnam War. Those are the
Yep.
people giving us the pictures, right? And
Well,
then I guess we should talk about, oh, sorry, before we conclude, the fourth proof, which is in the book, which you haven't
yes.
read, but you saw part of it as one of the video links. We have an
Mm-hmm.
eyewitness. As I'm editing this book that took me 15 years to write,
Mm-hmm.
I'm put in touch with an eyewitness to the faking of the moon landing fraud. And as he's dying, he fears the judgment of God. And as best as we can tell, if you confess your sin, you're forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing he says is that he's a murderer. He killed somebody. He wants to get that off his chest. And his son says, "Who did you kill?" And he says, "Well, I killed a coworker at Cannon Air Force Base, where he was the chief of security in 1968." Then his son calls the military police to investigate it because there's this John Doe missing person who the family doesn't have closure on, wants to set things right. The
Yeah.
military police come in and interrogate him as he's dying and says, "Well, why did you kill him?" And he says, "Well, we both eyewitnessed the filming of Apollo 11, June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1968 at Cannon Air Force Base, where they put two hangars together, created a fake moon set, swore us to secrecy. My friend wanted to blab to reporter because he thought it was morally wrong. I killed him to cover it up."
Mm.
He stood beside President Johnson, who was there for the first of 3 days of filming, who gave him a list of 15 VIP witnesses who are allowed in to observe. We published that list in the book, some of whom are still alive.
Wow.
And Buzz Aldrin's on that list. And so is Eugene Krantz, who was flight director for Apollo.
Uh-huh.
And they were there. And they faked the moon landing. We have an eyewitness. We have shadows intersecting. We have a tape of them faking being halfway to the moon 2 days into the flight. And we have the logic, you can't have greater technology in the past and in the future. They didn't
Yep.
go. It's the way that it is. And the book at Sibrel.com not only outlines it in a literary sense, it has 17 interactive video links which prove it.
Nice. Now, last thing before we go, Bart, I got to ask you. Now, I know that you have been threatened, and I know that all kinds of things have happened through the years. How have you managed to stay afloat and stay out here this long with the threats that have obviously come?
Well, divine intervention for one. Secondly, it's the tradition of these people not to go after the recipient of the information, rather the giver of the information.
Mhm.
For example, after that gentleman who I witnessed the moon landing fraud being filmed at Cannon Air Force Base, where he was chief of security, His son was my source to confirm this information. And after he gave it to me, his house was broken into. Everything about his father that they could find was confiscated. And days later, he was threatened with death if he ever spoke to me again about his father's participation in the moon landing fraud. That was about 2 years ago.
What a
So
shame.
he's the leaker, you could say. So they went after him, not me.
Hmm.
And divine intervention. And as you know, I had my little encounter with the CIA there at CNN in
Yes.
Atlanta, probably back before the CIA took it over. And I talk about this in the book in my chapter. A funny thing happened on the way to CNN. And what can you do? I basically talk about how it appears that there are at least two factions in the government fighting each other over
Hmm.
right and wrong, and they, by mutual agreement, keep it below the radar. And some of those good guys have been looking out for me as well.
Nice.
And I suppose it is a spiritual message here. We have the greatest accomplishment of mankind, the God, you could say, of science, the God of this world, from a secular point of view, putting a man on the moon, and for it to prove to be a falsehood done
Hmm.
by the most powerful nation on earth tells you about the true state of mankind. For example, who's the most trusted entity allegedly in society? It would be a religious leader, a priest. And yet the priesthood is accused of more child molestation than any organization on earth. And so
Hmm.
the greatest nation on earth, the most powerful nation on earth's greatest accomplishment is a fraud that they defrauded their own people, murdered their own people to cover it up. It's
Hmm.
ironic, isn't it? And it's very spiritually symbolic. So
Yes.
maybe, as I believe there is a God, as being a pawn in God's army, He has protected me
Nice.
because this is a purposeful disclosure that will help people see. You can't be cured of cancer, Raven, unless you know you have cancer, and
Absolutely.
mankind cannot be cured of their ills until we acknowledge our ills.
I agree.
And so, we've all been sick before where we just feel terrible and then we throw up and we feel a lot better. I'm not sure which has a more foul smell, manure or vomit, but I think it's vomit. And so, telling the truth about the moon landing fraud, it would be messy, but it'll also provide relief and healing. And I pray that
Hmm.
that happens.
Absolutely. Which brings me to the last question I'm going to ask you, if you will give me the extra minute maybe that it takes to answer. What kind of dilemma did you find yourself in when you decided to produce the original?
What type of what did you say? Dilemma?
Dilemma. Yeah.
Well, I didn't know it was going to be a dilemma at first because I was producing the film under the theory it might be true that they faked
Hmm.
it. I mean, the way I figured was that we'll never know whether they really went to the moon or not. We'll never have proof. But I was wrong. I found proof. Uh, it freaked me out. I was like, oh my gosh, they really did fake the moon landing. And I have a fake footage in my house. What have I done?
Wow.
I got myself into. I freaked out. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in danger.
Uh huh.
And I talk about my exploits for the very first time in the book at
Hmm.
Sibrel.com. I have a print, Kindle, or audio that I read myself. And I figured, prior to the book coming out, I wouldn't ever tell anybody these X-Files adventures that could make a movie in and of itself, because it's already hard to get people to accept the sad fact that they really did fake the moon landing. I don't want to
Yes.
complicate it by throwing in all these other weird uh, experiences, which are true. And
Hmm.
I just figured one hard to swallow pill at a time. But
Yeah.
now that it's been some time, and this is my final official statement on the matter, might as
Uh
well
huh.
tell the story. Tell the story about what happened. One of the things I talk about in the book is how Ralph Nader wanted to force car manufacturers, GM in particular, to put airbags in cars, which they
Hmm.
estimated at the time would save 10,000 lives a year. 10,000 people would not be killed every year if they put airbags in cars as mandatory. GM did not want to do it. And the CEO basically sicked former FBI agents on Ralph Nader to entrap
Yes.
him with prostitutes, to follow him everywhere he went, to try to discredit him, simply
Yes.
to not spend the money to put an airbag in all their cars. That's the harassment that he got over airbags. Imagine if I
Yes.
have proof that would take down the federal government, what harassment I would receive. And potentially only divine help could keep me alive to this hour.
Well, I tell you, it's been an amazing time. I remember when the video surfaced that you made, and I was like, whoa. Now, do you think the person who financed you knew what you were going to find?
Uh, no, I don't think any of us knew that we would find this reel of footage proving the moon landing fraud. We just did, and it was an alarming, and it was being thorough. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'll overturn a million rocks to find one clue if that's what it takes. And
Yes.
really, knowing that and knowing they, with preliminary clues, they may have very well faked the moon landing. I turned down the project originally. I talk about this in my book. I
Uh-huh.
thought there's these shadows intersecting, and there's this weird behavior of the astronauts, and the Soviets were more advanced, and they still haven't gone to this day, and something doesn't seem right about this. And I know I have this never give up kind of personality. And I thought, well,
Yes.
and I like puzzles. I've always liked puzzles. And I thought, well, if anyone could dig this up, it would probably be me. And then I thought, well, if they really faked it, that could be dangerous because I don't think they
Yes.
want people to know that. So I actually turned down the project. When Bill Casing asked me to make a movie about it in 1989, I turned it
Mm-hmm.
down. And I started studying right and wrong through reading the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And there is light and darkness, there is right and wrong, there is a judgment to come. It just seems logical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I realized I'm going to die anyway. And I realized that if they faked the moon landing, and they did, that's so much more profound of an event to mankind than if they'd actually gone. Do you realize that, Raven?
Yes,
Either
absolutely.
they went, they planted a flag, came back. Phew, that was a close one. We survived. Or they lied to the world and they embezzled money and they murdered people.
And
That's so
continue to
much.
do so to today.
That's right. But that event, the faking of this, is so much more profound historically and meaningful in a bad way, but still meaningful to mankind. The faking of the moon landing is one of the most profound events in human history.
Yes.
And most people don't know about it. Most people don't know they have this cure for this illness and it's so close. They don't know. And there's something wrong about that. I realize I'm going to die anyway. What they did was wrong and it is worth dying for. I'm going to die anyway. And if you believe in the Bible, the last chapter, I believe, of Revelation reminds people for about the 400th time of the sins, if they remain unrepentant to your deathbed, will prevent
Mm-hmm.
you from entering eternal life, being immoral and lying and stealing. But the very first one is being cowardly. Poor
Yes.
Eisenhower and his, you could say, presidential deathbed, his last day in office, January 19th, 1961, warned America from his opinion as a general and a president of 8 years, dark forces are trying to take over this country or already have.
Yes.
Funny, he didn't warn us or do anything about it for 8 years
Mm-hmm.
because he wanted to not be killed and retire and grow old and hang out with his grandchildren.
Yeah.
The problem is the next guy tried to do something about it and got killed for it.
Yes.
And Eisenhower ended up dying anyway,
Mm-hmm.
at the cost of 300 million Americans who are suffering to this day because of his selfish and, dare I say, cowardly decision. You
Yeah.
see, he
Yeah.
wasn't willing to risk his life for what is right, and that was wrong for him. You see, we're going to die anyway, and God or history will judge us for being cowards. And the Bible says the cowards will not enter the kingdom of heaven. You know, one time, Raven, I went through the seminar that helped people overcome their fears. If you have the fear
Hmm.
of stage fright, go up on stage. If you're afraid of dogs, pet a dog. So I always thought one of the most fearful things I could do was to jump out of an airplane. So I said, let's do it. So we all got together and we're gonna jump out of the airplane. And I was
Hmm.
terrified, and I did it again. I was still terrified. I said, I'm gonna keep doing this until I'm not terrified. Of course, I
Uh-huh.
thought, okay, back then it was about $150 a pop. I don't know what it is today, but I was like, this is gonna cost a couple of grand because it's probably gonna take me 20 times. So I remember the first time though. Back in the day, this was before tandem jumping. It was you were on
Hmm.
your own, and you were in this little Cessna or something with like I guess you about a 45-degree support between the wing and the airplane, and you kind of go
Yep.
out, kind of straddling it with your hands, with your feet dangling horizontally because of the 150-mile-per-hour winds, and you're
Hmm.
hanging there for about half a minute until you get this hand signal to let go to make sure you're over the drop zone and don't hit power lines. So I had about a half a minute to think about, do I really want to do this? And I'm looking down, and from that altitude, about a square inch was about 20 acres. And I'm like, this is dumb. What I'm going to do is I'm going to straddle this support here back to the door, get back in the plane. I can put my foot here. I can make it back in there. And then I thought, well, they'll laugh. The parachute teachers, they'll laugh. Oh, we had one today again. Blah blah blah. They'll forget about it. And then I realized, Raven, if I do that, that will be the memory I will have for the rest of my life.
Yes. Yes.
And I realized I would rather die than be a coward.
There you go, folks.
And that's what people have to realize. We're going to die. And we're at war with these people.
Yeah, that's the reason
And,
why I do my podcast, Bart. That's the reason why I do my podcasts.
well, I did a podcast recently. Let's not mention names, please.
Uh
But
huh.
the person felt it was their job to, argue every truthful point that I made. When they know that I'm right.
Hmm.
And that may be the etiquette of a podcast or whatever.
I
But
don't think so, but
but the etiquette is wrong, and here's why. We don't talk about the weather when there's a ticking time bomb under our table.
exactly.
And the fact is they did fake the moon landing. They did kill Kennedy, and they're doing other things that are
Yes.
highly moral and highly dangerous for all of mankind. We don't need to take their side to be politically correct. They did
No.
fake the landing. Why don't we spend time talking about how to take these people down and what we need to do to stop this evil from spreading? That's what we need
Yes.
to be spending our time doing.
I agree
And
100%.
yeah.
Folks, Bart Sibrel, it's Sibrel.com. And I did not know the book is up there for free. So, folks, please go visit him, send him an email, thank him for doing this interview.
Oh,
Bart,
the book isn't for free. I got my bills to
oh,
pay,
oh,
and
oh,
it took years to write.
oh.
The
But
video
it is
links are
available.
for free. The
All
video
right.
links are for free. If you want to just
Gotcha.
watch videos, all the videos are free. My hard work, 15 years
Ah,
of writing, 2 years of editing,
I
deathbed
misunderstood.
confessions, and my adventures, torturous adventures with the CIA.
So,
That's gonna cost you a whopping $17 in audio, 10 in Kindle, or 20 in print.
folks, see, that's a
To
good
help,
price.
I've earned it. Trust me.
Absolutely. Folks, you have to understand, Bart has been at this for 23 years, and that's not including all the other stuff he did beforehand. And if you all are interested, by all means, go to his website. He has a funny thing happened onto the moon, on the way to the moon for free. He's got video links on there for you, and he's got background information. I've been on the website, I just haven't got the book. Now I'm going to have to go find it on my Kindle. Bart, thank you for spending this time with me and the extra 10 minutes. I know you usually only go about an hour. Is there anything, final thoughts that you want to share with folks?
Well, I don't know. I mean, other than It looks like it's going to take divine intervention to
Hmm.
prevent the world from being ruined by the people who
Yeah,
run it.
I see that.
Their goal is to depopulate the world by 94%. That's what the Georgia
Hmm.
Guidestones used to say.
Yes,
I don't think if they have billions of dollars at their fingertips or twiddling their thumbs hoping it's going to coincidentally happen someday, wouldn't that be nice? I think they have a plan, and they'll
hmm,
probably succeed because most people spend the same amount of time at work as they do watching television. So I think it's going to take divine intervention to stop these people. And my personal opinion is that while they technically could be stopped, they won't be stopped,
I'm
which,
afraid that you're right.
which means save yourself from this corrupt generation. Get right with God and stay right with God. And we'll be on the side of eternal life, and they will not.
There
They
you
will have
go.
gained the world and lost their soul. And that's a bad calculation blunder on their part.
I agree. Folks, Bart Sibrel, I'm going to stop recording. Thank you for joining us. And Bart, thank you for joining me tonight. I appreciate you.
Sure, just check out Sabrel.com.
Absolutely.